भाई नमस्कार।
नमस्कार नमस्कार रामचंद्र भाई नमस्कार।
आज हम लोग सब बहुत ईगर हैं आपको उसके लिए, फिर इसके बीच में आपको एक दिन और मिला सकेंगे।
हाँ देखिए, एक मेल पे हम लोग कर लेंगे डिसाइड, क्योंकि वो देखना पड़ेगा कौन दिन कैसे। ठीक है। हाँ हाँ।
So maybe next within I think it will last for 15 days.
अच्छा।
So if you can arrange one of these days again.
हाँ ठीक है। एक हम लोग एक व्हाट्सएप या मेल भेज दीजिएगा तो मैं डिस्कस। हाँ
Okay, okay.
हाँ। So इस सेशन में बेसिकली वी हैव say 45 minutes talk and another half an hour 40 minutes question answers.
Okay, as you like. Yeah, that will be
हाँ
because you have to speak in English because this is international.
yeah. So I'll speak in English and then whatever is the question answer, it'll depend on that.
Any other
Yeah.
people also, they will also raise the questions.
Yes. फोन है, क्वेश्चंस आएंगे तो उसमें आ जाएगा।
C'est quelqu'un en Inde. C'est un docteur en Inde.
Docteur. Je travaille avec lui.
Il va donner une conférence, il va parler à tout le monde. Je parle doucement parce qu'on t'entend dans l'ordinateur. Il va t'entendre si tu parles fort. Ils vont regarder la conférence sur un grand écran. Il y aura un grand écran au mur, ils vont regarder la conférence.
त्यहाँ ठाउँ छ नि त्यता बस्नु, यता छेउमा नबस्नु। Hello. Abel, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Namaste, Alok ji.
Namaste, namaste.
I'll be
Namaste.
giving a short brief about yourself.
All
And
right.
we are going to...
Ah.
Thank you. Just 1 minute. We'll wait 1 more minute.
Okay.
Before we start, we'll concentrate for 1 minute. So let us close our eyes. And let us be at the present. Let us be aware of our thoughts. Let us call upon the higher energy, higher consciousness to prevail upon ourselves. Thank you. Thank you all for gathering here on the occasion of International Democratic Education Conference. Today's talk is extremely special for all of us. This is a welcome talk to all the education enthusiasts around the world. Before we start the talk, I would like to give a short introduction about Dr. Alok Pandeyji. He is a psychiatrist, philosopher, researcher, and lecturer in integral education based on the philosophy of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. He had several encounters with death during his medical practices. A philosopher of temperament, he raised many questions and sought answers to them, both internally and externally. It was finally only by coming into contact with Sri Aurobindo and the Mother that he found the answers that quenched the thirst of his soul. He is currently associated with the Sri Aurobindo International Institute of Integral Health and Research in Pondicherry, an institute dedicated to Sri Aurobindo's work and vision in the field of health. He has been the editor-in-chief of Namaha, a journal dedicated to the cause of an integral approach to psychology, health, and medicine, since its inception in 1993. Author of books such as Death, Dying and Beyond, Patients at the Crossroads, and Veda of the Body. His articles have been published in various reputable journals. An eloquent speaker, he has conducted workshops in India and abroad about yoga, education, health, and psychology. Let's welcome him for this wonderful talk on a new education for a new consciousness. Thank you. I pass it to Dr. Alok Pandeyji very much. Thank you.
Namaste. One thing we all can see that since the last 50 years, the whole world and society is witnessing a massive change. Now, while we may discuss and try to understand the causes of the change, let me start with a little bit of preamble that when man wants to change the society, when he wants to change the world around him, he tries to change systems, governments, machinery, etc. And when God wants to change the world, he changes the children. When man wants to progress, he has advancements of technology. That's his idea of progress. Whereas when God wants man to progress, he plants within him a new aspiration, an aspiration which we see planted today in the heart of earth. When man imagines a peaceful life, post-retirement peaceful life, if at all there is any such thing, he imagines that he can amass wealth, he will have a good bank balance, he will have health at the doorsteps, and he will lead a peaceful life. And when God decides that we should have a peaceful life, he gives us inner peace and happiness. So we don't need to any of these things. And when man wants, when man writes nowadays, we have this system of writing biodata and we speak about SWOT analysis. So when man writes about his SWOT analysis, strengths and weaknesses, he writes about his assets, capabilities and weaknesses, etc. And when God looks into man to see his strengths and weaknesses, he only looks at two coordinates, soul and nature. And if God were to write the analysis, he would simply say, he has found his soul or he has not found his soul. As simple as that. And if he has not found his soul, does he have faith that there is something beyond the limits of man towards which man must climb? And or he doesn't have such a faith. He's still lingering in the usual round and the endless cycle of life, which Sri Aurobindo so beautifully puts in Savitri. Oh, force compelled, fate driven, earth born race, oh, petty adventurers in an infinite world. How long shall you tread the circling tracks of mind around your little self and petty things? But not for a changeless littleness where you meant, not for vain repetition where you built. So basically, this has been always a thought within the human frame, that are we meant to live within this frame in which we are born, or is there something beyond the human formula of life? And we see these two lines of humanity, one which are satisfied within the frame. They like to do what is best possible within the frame. And there are others who like to transcend the human formula and seek the beyond, the mystics. Now, those who like to transcend the human formula basically are, one may say that man is actually meant for that. Even within the human formula, we are constantly trying to improve. And all education is about that. If you look at education, in a certain sense, education is an acceptance of the fact that human beings are not finished. Our nature as it is constituted by birth is not the last word of our existence. And there's a lot more we can change and improve and grow and progress. And only we may differ along the lines of progress, along the systems of education, etc. But that man can change. Education is an acceptance of a deep hidden truth about us human beings, that we are meant for conscious evolution. We don't use this word, but all education is an empowerment. It should be an empowerment. It is meant to help us grow. And where does all this begin? Now, we see when Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese mystic, much misunderstood in his own time, was too much into the future when he said, your children are not your children. You see, it can be very threatening to the parents. Your children are not your children. You are the bow from whom time is shooting its arrow. And the archer wants to bend the bow at the right angle, so that where are these arrows going? They're going into the future. He probably foresaw probably even more than what he himself understood. And in the beginning of the previous century, we see Mother and Sri Aurobindo, both around 1910, when Sri Aurobindo was asked about some future prediction, because by then he was already recognized as a great yogi. He spoke about that there are going to be many upheavals, many revolutions, many turmoils, a massive change that the world is going to undergo, in which India is going to play a crucial part. And this is what he foresaw. And the mother, we know a little bit about her. She was, born in France, in Paris, and grew up there, but a profound mystic, a yogi by her own right. She spoke in 1912 that there would be, or rather 1914 or 15, she spoke about the coming of new children, about a new race which nature is preparing. And she saw the upheavals of nature. If we really look at the previous century and the one which went before, we can literally say that the 19th century and the 20th early part was certainly a century of upheavals. We can literally say it was a century of revolution world over, as if people were preparing for something. There was restlessness, all the established formulas of life, and at the same time is seeking, for instance, the French Revolution with its seeking for freedom, fraternity, and unity, and the freedom from massive freedom from imperialism, thought forms, in science, everywhere. There was an urge that there is something to be born. And the mother saw in this restless urge almost that nature is trying to prepare for a new kind of birth. And that we see, we can almost divide the previous century into two clear-cut halves. First 50, 55, maybe till the Cuban crisis, 57, 59. We can say that this was a century, first half was a very difficult half. I mean, it was literally earth undergoing a labor pains. If you look at it from the larger perspective, shuffling its coil, wanting some new birth, two great goriest wars, the Spanish flu, and in India itself, there was this revolutionary upheaval, plenty of deaths and famine and whatnot. So it was like the labor pains of the earth. And in the process, what happened? There were massive infrarational forces, vital forces, stooping upon earth, forces beyond human control, unimaginable, tremors that the earth was facing. But in the bargain, what happened? The intra-rational forces completely destroy man's idea of a neat rational world. If you look at it, we use the word age of enlightenment for the rational age, which was ushered in by Europe and other, which was followed up. So it was like we imagined that there would be a very nice, reason can create a just perfect machine. It can create a society which is wonderful and everything. And well, to an extent, it tried whatever it could, but suddenly the onslaught of these forces broke away that neat symmetrical world. And it happened everywhere. In the field of science itself, reason broke its fixed paradigms that, there's a very neat symmetrical world. Right in the underbelly of atom, they were teeming with particles about whom one didn't know what they are doing and how they have come into existence and what is their law. It was a very different world altogether. And the entire society built upon industry, science, rational thought, things should be the way they should be, completely broke. And we know how after that postmodern thought came into existence, which further started deconstructing everything. It was like the last ramparts of the good old world were being pulled down. And it must have been very disconcerting. Even now, many parents still wonder, what has happened to the world in our time. But in our time, so-called our time, in the first half of the previous century, it's not that they were only good things, they were horrible things. And when there is a massive destruction, in India, we use the word dance of Kali, dance of Shiva, then it's not only the Tandava, it's not only the bad things which are destroyed, even the good must go. Because good and bad are two sides, a verse and reverse side of one reality. A new good must come up, and both have fed the soil of human nature. And this we start seeing from the 1960s, a new kind of children. And these children are very unique certain ways. For instance, the number of child prodigies, it's well known, which have come up more and more, a lot of scientific studies. There have been even attempts to classify these children into coming from this dimension, that dimension, indigo children. Then they grew up a little more, became star-eyed children, then crystal children and rainbow children. So I'm not going into those. It's a question of semantics and how people are studying. It's good at least people are recognizing that there is a new kind of, if I may say so, subspecies wearing the human form. It's very difficult. These children are not understood by parents. And the children don't understand their parents. When they look at the adult world, they almost feel that these are very narrow, rigid, almost, brutal people. How they hit and how they scold, they can't understand this. At the same time, parents can't understand that why these children don't follow any norms, because the old world has gone, collapsed. They are literally like what humanity must have been a million years back, or whatever date we want to fix for the advent of humanity, moving in jungles, not knowing why they are there, where they have to go. They are like a new species. They look a little bit like the chimpanzee and the gorilla, and they try to find resemblances, but they are a new being. Probably they may have been regarded as mad in a world which was inhabited by the big chimps, and yet man was different. He carried within himself a fire that would not only light up his food and his home, but a fire which will lead to a journey beyond his little planet, and a fire which will break free from the boundaries of heaven and earth and discover new truths, new ideas, creative impulsions. So this is what was man must have been during that time, much misunderstood. He himself wouldn't have understood himself. And I think these children are like that, much in their position. They have no reference point. If they look at the old world, they cannot understand. The old world cannot understand that, them either. And there was an article sometime back, the me mine generation. I think it was a little harsh on children, though it ends very positively. But the me mine generation literally means at another level that they are explorer. They don't know who they are. They cannot compare them with their parents because they are so different. Their thinking is so different. The generation which I'm not talking of today, but now a lot of new age children are becoming parents, have become parents. But there was a time when there was such a big generational shift and a generation gap that the parents just didn't understand, because the thought was confined to a little space within which they lived, and a little bit maximum traditions, certain customs, certain culture. Now they're broken free. At the most, when parents felt about something higher, they couldn't pin at anything beyond religion. So the string was between a religious thought and a secular thought, the so-called rationalistic thought. Whereas these children have broken both. Now where are they headed to? A deep spiritual impulse. So as I said, like in the old world, there was this rules of right and wrong. That's the moral world. These rules could have been religious, or they were rules discovered by some people, culture, tradition, whatever it was. There were things to be done and there were things not to be done. That's how moral science used to be. There were blacks and whites, no gray shades. Now these children are discovering the gray shades and they are coming up with unique solutions. And these challenges are coming in new ways. Euthanasia. A lot of people ask, is it good or bad? Now, there are many live-in relationship. Is it good or is it bad? Having a degree, is it good or is it bad? New innovative ways of thinking, is it good or is it bad? So there are children who are like barrier breakers, who are trying to figure out what really is good. And they are discovering a new ethical, intuitive ethical sense. The sense of the beautiful, the sense of the true, the sense of the right, not based on any book teaching, but based on something which is awakening within themselves. And third thing which we notice along with that, the first being child prodigies, that sometimes they appear like very reckless, careless children, as if they are born with a carefree laughter. Only gods are supposed to be so reckless and careless with their laughter. Human beings are carrying a burden that, they have to earn a living, they have to do this, be established, ambition, this, that. They don't seem to be bothered about it. Ask them, what do you want to do with your life? And they are cool. That's the word. Cool is the new thing, because they somehow carry a faith instinct in their life that life will find a way for them. You see, this faith in life is a wonderful thing. Mind has gone, but a new faith is emerging. As again, Khalil Gibran so beautifully says, that their lives longing for itself. Your children are not your children, their lives longing for itself. Life is longing for something beautiful, true, divine, which we don't understand, but life has its ways. So these children, when you talk to them about what do you want to do with life, they'll say, we are trying to figure out. Many of them for quite some time, they don't even know what they're trying to figure out. We'll see. Now this we will see is pregnant with possibilities. Much better than a child of 5 saying, I want to be or at 10, fully conditioned, I want to be, a doctor or an engineer, standard formats. They are open to, when they say we will see, it means they are open to things of dimensions, possibilities which we cannot envisage. I mean, recently I heard again, a little child talking about who is your superhero, and the child says God. Now says God, how is God your superhero? And what will you do if God comes to you? I'll hug God and say thank you. Now, this is a child of 9. This cannot be a normal. I mean, I imagine in my own childhood, just on a very personal note, somebody asked me, what do you want to do in your life? And I said, I want to be a poet, write poetry. Now, this was shocking, both to the people who asked the question and to my parents also. But even as a child, this is, when I was going for a 11th standard education. But as a child, 6-year-old, somebody asked, what do you want to do in life? I said, Devasur Sangram, I want to fight for the gods. What kind of crazy aspiration is this? But these children are coming up with such things. They want to be as God. They don't want to just go to temple and worship God. They are not happy with that. They are not happy with frameworks of thought. So they are the massive barrier breakers. They don't accept the fixed scroll of destiny that, it was karma, so we have to go through it. They challenge karma. They want to change it. So these are definitely very different kind of children. And they need a special kind of education because they are not the old format. So what we are trying to do is trying to apply the old format on a new software has changed. It won't apply. So we have to now apply a new format. So in the new format of education, where does education begin? We have an idea of education that in the school. So we talk about stakeholders, typical mental world. So who are the stakeholders in education? You have the teachers, education, you have the parents. Sometimes people also mention society. So these are three different grids. But in today's world, no, education is universal. Everybody takes responsibility. The parents, the educators, but society also. If society doesn't assume the role of being an educator, you see, this was the idea of Gurukul. Gurukul is not about a system, people are wearing dhoti and putting tika and, reciting mantras. That's not Gurukul. Gurukul literally means the lineage of the great master. It was a family. It was like an ashram where children picked up things. And that's something directly we have in the ashram school. People often ask, okay, what is the system in the ashram school? So I often say there is no system. Why do you want a system? Well, still tell us something. Say, well, when mother was pressed to say that, tell us about some system because she said free progress. So what is free progress about? She says education governed by the soul. That was the end of the story because nobody knew what to ask after that. So where is the soul to be found? What is to be done? But the beauty is about the ashram school, which I keep telling people, is that they're growing up in an environment which is right next to the Samadhi of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, the atmosphere, the people who are supposed to be in the practice of yoga. So, and in a very cosmopolitan way. So it's a recognition of the fact which now world over is coming up, that society is part of the education. It is like we can't suddenly pick up some people and isolate them and say, oh, you are evil, a bad guy, you must be in prison. Who created this evil? What I was carrying within me, it's a spillover. It was in my fantasies. The other person has played out the fantasy. I would feel happy thinking about these things, dreaming about horrible things in my so-called, when nobody is watching me except God, which we have, packed with his bag. Now he has entered through every door. Whereas on the other hand, when a person does the same thing, we say, oh, he's a horrible guy and he's a bad guy, because we as a society have a role to play. So in other words, now this idea of education in school is going to go away. And I think one of the good offshoots of this, every cloud has a silver lining or a golden lining. So one of the fallouts of all this has been this kind of digital technology which has come up, education which is moving beyond the classroom and people can connect in different ways. It is a recognition that education is not just a classroom phenomena. It goes beyond the classroom. Everything is an education. And the day should come when I imagine that, children will just grow up organically and they will be teachers. But who are these teachers? Not people who have done a B.Ed, M.Ed and all these degrees, but people who are wise. And when child comes and they talk to a child as to what did you eat today? Now I'll give an example how education can be very interesting and engaging with these children. And they are so profound. We are actually missing out on their profundity. So I remember an interaction with some children, and one of the teachers from the ashram, Dr. Maheshwari, so beautifully he asked the children that, okay, tell me, what did you have for breakfast today? So one of the child raised the hand and said, idli. Oh, so where did the idli come from? Well, my mom made it. Oh, your mom made it, or made it. It came from your mom. Yes, from your mom or somewhere else. Then the child thinks and says, well, the material for the idli came from the market. From the market or somewhere else. So from the field. So working backwards, suddenly one of the child had an aha phenomena. And the child said, actually, that when we have a grain of rice, the sun, the water, the earth, the wind, everything is there. It has made that grain of rice from which the idli has come. So when we eat idli, We are connecting with the whole universe. This was like an aha insight, and he was deliberately leading children to a point where on their own they came. This capacity for insight rather than mere information, that, well, this is this. When we have too many answers, we miss out on questions. This is what has happened. Too many books, too much information. They don't have questions, which is very dangerous, because, whereas the real education is to start from the near observation, but lead them to a point where there is questions about life. They are not ideal child is who is not satisfied with all the answers that he has received from the books. So this was one beautiful example of oneness, which a child understood, which people who talk about oneness in spiritual satsang, they don't understand. There was another example of how children understand the sense of unity, which I myself experienced in a small village in Odisha, where there was a school and children in 8th or 9th standard. And I asked them, one of the child asked me, sir, which language does God understand? I said, well, you tell me, you should know. Do you pray to God? Yes. So you should know which language God understands. So one of the child said, Odia. I said, how do you know Odia? He said, because whenever I have prayed in Odia, then I always receive an answer from mother. So I asked that, what about other children who pray in Tamil and who pray in Hindi and Sanskrit and English? Said, yes, they also get answers. So what language does God understand? Now, one of the child comes up very beautifully. Sir, he understands the heart. So I said, so beautiful. All languages are mental construct to communicate what we feel deep within. And if a language cannot communicate it, it's not worth pursuing it. I mean, we must refine it to an extent where a language becomes so precise and beautiful to express what we feel within the heart. This is the uniqueness of Sanskrit. It's not about how many alphabets and all that, but it is a language so precisely tuned and refined, even French for that matter, that it can convey subtleties of feelings, subtleties of inner states, which is unique, because language is meant for that. But where does language originate? It originates in the heart. If the heart is clear, if the heart is full of love, speak to anybody in any language or no language, and yet there will be some kind of a rapport and an understanding. Somebody has so beautifully said, where is the wisdom lost in words and information? So this is what these children spontaneously understand. So what is meant when it is said that, they have to be educated in a new way? Well, let us begin from the beginning. We feel that education will start in a classroom when the child is 5. Nowadays it's 3, when it started in 3, 2. So obviously because in 2 they are preparing for pre-nursery or whatever. So some people were feeling very disconcerted. I said, yeah, for the time being it is, but they are moving in the right direction. Oh, what do you mean moving in the right direction? I said, one day they will realize it starts from conception. Because all education starts from conception. What is conception? Literally, it's a, without the pun intended, or maybe intended, parents conceive a child, what the child will be. And that is something very beautiful automatically happening now. In the olden time, children were conceived for the following reasons. One, particularly if you have more boys, well, more strength for the family, because daughters are going to go away. That's why people were asking for boys. Not because of any hatred of women, but simply because boys will stay. Most of the society was, farmers and all this. So boys are a strength because they'll go and work in the fields. So this was the whole idea. Or they just kept having children. More the merrier. God knows why. And third, it's a very primitive way of looking at life. But it was literally like, the strength one finds in numbers. You see, if you look at these species, the lower species, they produce so many children. Why? Because threat of extinction. But the higher mammals, even lions and all, they don't produce many children. They are like sure of themselves. Strength is not in numbers, but in quality. So now we see a new trend which is coming up, which is very good. Last maybe few decades it's coming up. People plan a child. And I think it's a wonderful thing to plan a child. Education starts from there. And this planning is not just about, outer number of money, how much money I have. Can I really bring up a child with this much of money? Do I improve my income? That's how it starts. All good things may have a bad start, doesn't matter. But now the planning is not just that. Many parents I know who are, newly married, they let us see, let's first settle down between us. Children are not meant to, help parents settle down in their turbulent relationship. nor are they meant to be like old age stick. That's how people had children, that when we are old, they will, be our Sahara, help to us. They are very silly ideas of children. Now parents want to plan children, conscious child. And I think conscious parenting is a new thought which is coming up, and this is something to be capitalized upon. So conscious parenting is not just about whether I am equipped from financial point of view, whether my relationship is stable, but about why do I want to have a child. And this should be there at the back of mind of everybody. Why do I want to have a child? Is it just because of these outer reasons? Is it because the child will fulfill my secret ambitions? He will get the money which I don't have, he will become what I have not become. No, the child will come into the world with his own destiny. We are trustees, and he brings life's longing with itself. And that was the Indian conception of Gurukul. And Gotra. Gotra was that a rishi has started a work, and the entire lineage must fulfill that work. So it's not about me, it's not about my family. It's something which nature is longing to create a type, a new type. I mean, some of these examples of conscious parenting is, I give this example of Shivaji. You know how his mother, she didn't bring the child for her own this thing or even to create an empire, but she saw certain things in her environment, and she wished her child to be a hero who can, overthrow a whole empire. Now, this is a kind of one example of conscious parenting. There are many examples. So today, when we bring a child, what is behind us? Is there an idealism? Are we driven by idealism or selfishness? If it is out of selfishness, then we are back to the old days. But if we are driven by a greater ideal, it could be a limited ideal. Maybe my child will grow up and serve the nation. Wonderful. Maybe my child will grow up and embody some of the beautiful divine qualities. Maybe my child will come up with make this world a more beautiful place, so that when he comes, passes through it and departs, people say that, well, he came. Now, we had the old time philosophy that everybody comes crying, and when this is a very pessimistic attitude. The attitude should be, whatever way we come into this world, when we go, we leave this world a little better, a little fairer. Now, when parents come up with a conscious conception wherein they are going beyond the frame of their family, it is also declaring itself in the new trend. What is trend? No surname is the cool thing. And, they don't want surname. My own son, when I made him free of surname, then when he grew up, I asked him, do you want the surname? He said, no, I'm cool about it. I like it this way. So sometimes people wonder, is he really your child? So I said, why? What are the doubts? He looks just like me. Well, he doesn't carry your surname. I said, that's why he's my child, because I don't believe in it. So this is how these children are going to come up. They live in large spaces of time. That's why they want space. It's not that they don't want to belong to family. They belong, but they are already beyond the family. Today's children won't respect because you are grown up in age. They will respect when they feel that you are authentic. And we must teach them that courage, that yes, they should have the courage. I mean, I remember the ancient Indian story, which I keep recounting. In that story, we have the essence of true education. So one is when the young Satyakam, he has to go and he wants to have the highest kind of knowledge, which in ancient times was known as Brahma Jnana. So Brahma Jnana was taught by one of the rishis, and he goes there to learn, have Brahma Jnana, and the rishi tells him that, well, I want to know your lineage. And the child goes back and asks his mom, tell me, who is my dad? I haven't seen him since childhood. And she says, you know what, I have worked as a maid in many houses. I can't say who's your dad, but this for sure that I'm your mom. And she goes and tells the great sage that, that's what my mother has said. The great sage, you are fit for Brahma Jnana because you and your mother had the courage of speaking truth. The mother says in one of her writings that never scold children. Try to explain to them. And if you cannot explain, they cannot understand by explanation, change the false vibration into the true one. But she says for that, you must yourself live in truth. And then she ends up by saying, just a drop of truth. A drop of truth in their life. We have taught them all kinds of lies from what they should be. I mean, we start by making them disconnected from their true self. So in all the education, people once were comparing, like in the ashram school, the mother spoke about the psychic education. It's a different thing that how much one can practice it, because to practice psychic education, you can't do it mentally. One has to realize the soul. So when it comes to teachers, parents, the society, you have to discover your own soul. Otherwise, one cannot bring it. And it's worth the discovery. So this new thing is coming up. But this discovery of the soul is coming in children in a very new way, which you fail to notice. And it is like, I want to be myself. They don't know what this self is. But they know that this is not the self which society gives me. I am born with a surname, with a religion, with a this, that, all kinds of baggage. They don't carry a baggage. They say, I want to be myself. You ask them, what is yourself? Then they founder, because they are like the barbarians of the new world. Like barbarian humanity was better than the chimp of yesterday. So they don't know what is this self. But they've entered into a subjective age. And this is a good sign. Of course, they will have to pass through a perilous passage because the old constructs are gone. It was much easier if a child said that I am my dad's or my, my lineage. People put those photographs with all parent, grandparents in their houses. Look, your grandfather was this. Children are not interested in that. They want to be who they are. And this seeking which has come in children, this thing towards discovery, is leading them to a new way of life, which is called as universal learning. And this is what should be the trend. At least there should be one teacher, if one cannot have many, who is like a wise young man, not a wise old man. I don't know why we associate wisdom with old age. It may be the other way around. Because sometimes, as they say, old age is when the, broad mind and the narrow waist replace their places, exchange places. So, old is not necessarily wise and young is not necessarily a fool. And it's good to remain a little bit of fool even in old age, so that you have the chance of opening. A person who is who doesn't carry a little shade of foolishness in himself is running the risk of becoming fossilized. So it's good to this tendency to make a little error, which opens you to infinite possibilities. So there is there should be in every school somebody who is constantly progressing. This idea that teachers get a degree and now they have all the books in their head is gone. The teachers should be constantly improving and discovering new things. And for children, it should be the love for learning. They come back and they have observed the plants. They come back and there is a discussion. What do you understand about plant life? And slowly they should reach a point where they feel that plants are as conscious. Only the consciousness is unexpressed in them. What is the difference after all between, a grain of dust and man? Put this grain of dust on the feet of a deity in India, as they say, or make an image of Durga. Durga Puja going on now. Pick up this clay. Even, this clay is got from 9 different places. And you make an image. That clay becomes a goddess greater than human being. What a beautiful symbol it is. So this is the potential of the clay. Let them understand that a grain of dust has potential to become a great god, a goddess, depending on how you use it, how you place it. And, you can use it on the, face of the deity. It becomes tilak. So this is how we have to make, understand the secret divinity in everything. In the river, in the ocean, several times in interaction with children, I ask them, so what did you learn today? And they start by, sir, first class. I said, no, first class is when you wake up. So who is the first teacher? So they are a little bit, who is the first teacher? Well, first teacher is sun. What does he teach you? He teaches that there is no darkness which can never end. First, most important fundamental lesson. All darkness is bound to end, because night is a temporary passage and sun is the eternal truth. This is a self-evident fact. From science we can learn. Now, this is the other aspect, that we have divided education into, this is physics, this is chemistry, this biology, whereas nature doesn't educate us like that. The sun is at once a cold, icy mass. Icy mass, probably we can say that, though it is, some water has been discovered under surface. But it's a cold, lifeless planet or exoplanet. We can say that. Or we can equally say that about the moon I am speaking, that the moon is one that adorns the head of Shiva. At once we see the symbol and the outer reality. That is education, where the sun is on one side an orange ball of fire, but on the other side is the symbol of the divinity which looks all around and which is ablaze with that fire of truth, and whose light and fire are two sides of one reality. The light of knowledge and the strength to execute. That's what the sun represents. So this kind of an education which incorporates every experience in life. When they go for a trek and see a river, they can get education from a river, that life has an origin and it's rushing towards the sea. These are the only two things to be remembered. Where do I come from and where am I going? So these are now a sense of universal learning. The typical classroom construct is a mental construct, a world which has gone. 9 o'clock till 5 o'clock, that's my working time. 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, that's my study time. Or when I come back, I do homework, that's my study time. Rest is play time. Maximum education goes on when we play. You see, this is something very interesting in the ashram school. When sports ground was started and children were engaged in games, and even the elderly, many of the sadhaks, then people started raising questions, because to think of spiritual life is to sit and meditate. So they asked mother, what is happening? These children are, and you are asking us also, many of them are joining the playground, they're playing football. What is all this? So they asked Sri Aurobindo, and Sri Aurobindo gave beautiful replies. He said, first of all, we have missed out on the importance of the body. All creation, higher consciousness, everything, the greater energy, whatever we call it, will manifest through matter. If we neglect matter, how are we going to have the base? Matter will break down. That's one of the reasons, one of the challenges of evolution. A chimp is bigger even in his brain size possibly, and an elephant even more. But it cannot manifest thought, because matter within it is not ready to express a greater truth. So this, we have to work at both the ends in education. We can't miss out on the body. But the body, not just because I stay healthy and my bills for the doctor is reduced and I just enjoy life more. That is the base. But more important is the body should become a fit receptacle, vessel, a vehicle for the higher consciousness, for the divine consciousness, for truth, for light, for higher forces and energies of harmony, a greater order of beauty, of ananda, of divine force to express itself through the brain, through the heart, through the body. So there should be an emphasis on this. So Sri Aurobindo gave this wonderful reason. But he also said something very interesting, that sports is one of the simple ways to build psychological qualities which are the foundation in yoga. One of the lessons which people learn much later in the Gita, and that's why Swami Vivekananda said very beautifully, teach them football rather than, analysis of the Gita, because people analyze the Gita and end up remembering the slokas. But we learn it while playing a game of football. Of course, Gita is a profound scripture, but look at it, how people can learn it. Very simply, they learn that when we play, sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, but always we progress. So the game of life is not about winning and losing. It's not about success and failure. Every failure takes us one step higher to a greater success. Every success can end up in degenerating us, because we become too sure of ourselves, and then you discover that success is often probably a curse, and failure is often a blessing, because failure propels us to become better, to improve, to progress, and who knows, one day bursting beyond the bounds of humanity. So these are lessons we can learn simply by games, and the importance to be given to games is so important. Then the whole inner field of nature, which in these children gets neglected. There's hardly a class, people talk about value education, and they're nice stories, very, very good. Courage and, beauty and harmony, it's wonderful, good stories, love and truth. But most importantly, the inner field, how to observe my thoughts. How can I change my thoughts? Can I change my thoughts? Now, children don't understand how to change thoughts. Can thoughts be changed? What are these thoughts? Just to sit for a few minutes to observe the thoughts. Where do they come from? As the Kena Upanishad raises this question, Kena Preshitam, where do thoughts come from? And where are they going? This simple exercise of observing the thoughts, where they come and go, will make them understand that there is something called as nature and something called as self. Nature is not me. It's a robe that I wear. But me is different. Who observes the thoughts? Simple thing. Feelings. They live in a world of feelings. Children grow up, entire education system, and they don't know how to love. They don't even know why. They raise this question, why should I love the person? As if love has a why. And they try to mentally answer it. I must love because these advantages, disadvantages, then marriage and this and that. This is all wrong. Love is a joy unto itself. And the only reason to love is to love better, to progress in the energy of love. There can be no other reason to love. It's an energy which is sent forth from the divine. How beautifully Mother takes it to what heights. That when we love another human being, it's not I love you. It is the divine in me who loves the divine in you, passing through two human vessels. That's all. And when we understand this simple truth, this profound truth, that then we begin to open to a greater and greater possibility of love, a diviner possibility of love. Look how the divine pours himself on whole creation. We can learn from flowers how they love, how they are equal. A whole Veda is there in the flowers, in the sun, in the river. This whole earth, there is a Veda. As Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, a Veda, knower of the unwritten book. So that's what we have to learn, teach them, to open their eyes, inner eyes, go beyond the books, beyond the frames of thought, and look at this knowledge which is there within whole creation. That's why the word Veda. Veda comes from Vid, which means the knowledge. What knowledge? Secret knowledge. You can't get it from books. Na yamatma na medha na bahuna shuten. You cannot get it in classroom. You cannot get it by hearing from somebody else. How do I get it? It is revealed. So to open this faculty of revelation through which children can acquire knowledge for themselves, it's a great and onerous task. And this task is not only on parents or on teachers, but on the whole of society. It starts from conception, but when children enter into this world, how do we treat children as a social group? I've seen in colonies and everywhere, this is my child, this is somebody else's child. Even in school, this grouping starts. Rich man's child, poor person's child. So that way, one thing good in ashram school is you can't do that kind of stuff. So, children have, one purpose of uniform is this, so that you don't, but a better thing than uniform is because uniform tends to make things, again, too uniform, to allow for the variation of nature. But there should be this whole conception should grow in them that, well, children, when they come to the school, they are no more rich man or poor man. That was the idea of Gurukul. They belong now to this place. That was the whole idea of even hostels. We don't have that facility. So they learn in this classroom. Even if teachers are very good, they go back to the house and they have parents who are someone very special. And they don't want their child to meet with that child and, all kinds of walls, divisions. Where do they learn compassion from? They learn compassion in their dealing with society, forgiveness, kindness, courage. They learn when they deal with everybody around. And if they see that people are lying, deceiving, then they just pick it up. Very unfortunate. Children don't know how to lie. We teach them. And very young, when they are very young, we teach them. Already that original file is corrupted with the Trojan virus, malware. In fact, it starts from beginning, even before the child is conceived. Now, the role of conception, so much, mother speaks about that, the kind of thoughts that mother has, feelings that the mom has, father also, but especially the mom. So that means they must, right from the conception, right up to their growth, they must grow in an atmosphere of love, of beauty, of harmony. Now in the house, school, one can still create outwardly an atmosphere. But in house, if they see quarrel, they see disharmony, they see constant conflict, it's not healthy for children. It's not good for their growth. Whatever we may teach them, we are giving an atmosphere, they'll get stifled. Put the best flour and throw all the pollution of the, trucks and cars going by, smoke. What will happen to the flower? It will begin to wilt. Simply because the atmosphere is not good. So to create an atmosphere in the school of beauty, harmony, to create beauty and harmony in the home, to create beauty and harmony in the society. Sometimes even in society, people just plan things randomly and the whole thing doesn't give the sense of beauty. The sense of beauty is one of the best corrective to evil and ugliness. Just to have beauty in the environment. So there are so many things, but most of all, this possibility that there is something beyond the human frame. This is where we began from, that they must grow up with this idea that, this idea of Ikebana, something which I really liked when I heard about it, that a master makes a nice arrangement, then he leaves the scissor there, slightly open. So why? Because there could be somebody who may conceive a better arrangement. So another master, we don't know who, He may come and make just a little clipping here and make it look even more beautiful. So this idea of endless progression and perfection should be there, and it should replace ambition. Ambition is a dead end. People, when you ask, what's your ambition? I want to have a lot of wealth. What will you do after that? Well, after that, I'll see. Or I want to become a, famous doctor or a big man or whatever it means. Big man, I don't know. Big belly or, whatever. So I want to have a lot of, big power post. So what happens after that? After that, we don't know. So we see people who are retired, who are incapable. Either they continue working till the last day because they are so afraid of being with themselves. People who are workaholics, who work right morning till night, only work. They're as if afraid of confronting themselves. That also shouldn't, that's not a good thing. Work is important, very important, because it's a great purifier. But this work should flow from who we are. It should be like a play, not a distraction, not a, something where we are running away from ourselves into work. Just like we run into parties. Of course, running into work, escaping into work is definitely better than escaping into parties. To escape ourselves, to escape from our boredom. But work should be a purifier to help us express who we are inside. Who we are must flow into what we do. So all these are aspects, most importantly, that there is no limit to human progress, which means we need to get this, that human beings are meant to consciously evolve. So that when they finish their education, whatever, higher grades or whatever it is, and when they are ready to go out into the world, they understand that this is a beginning, not an end of my learning. And this learning now will be of a different kind, not another course, not another degree, but this is a real life learning where I'll come in contact with the world energies. I'll come in contact with people. I'll come in contact with challenges of life, in my personal life, in relationship, in everywhere. And now vast vistas of progress and growth are opening before me when this is over. So this is how education should go on from conception right till the point of death. This idea that one is old and now, it's time to die is one of the most foolish ideas which should be thrown far, far away. Even at the point of death, one can learn from somebody who's dying and somebody, let me close this with this beautiful little story about death, how education starts from conception right from death. Sometime when I see people who are in terminally ill, I tell them to imagine what your life should be in time to come. And it's a very good occupation because they are looking forward, not looking backward. They conceive what they would like to be reborn as. It's a beautiful thing to look at. Now, of course, it's done very sensitively, but most people respond very well. So we have the story of Ravana who is on his deathbed, and Lord Rama tells Lakshmana that please go and ask him. Ask him what? He has something which he can give you. What can he give me? Oh, he has managed his people very well. He made sure that they all lived in luxury with, golden houses, everybody. Go and ask him. He knows about Raj Dharma. Speak to him. Now, this story is commonly interpreted as that, then he speaks about his Raj Dharma and talks about it. But there is another side of the story. Lord Rama, in his grace, compassion, wants Ravana to take a look at his life. And this is a wonderful way to learn something. He doesn't want him to lose that moment. So when Ravana starts speaking about how he has looked after his subject, he also notices where he made blunders, errors, how he could have made things better, how things could be done in a beautiful way. Same thing we see when Bhishma is on the bed of arrows and Shri Krishna, so subtle it is. He tells, Arjuna, go and learn from him. Now that's when it's a moment of reckoning for Bhishma that, well, this boy has come to learn from me and he holds me in such a high esteem, but where did my holding tightly to my pratigya led a whole civilization to? And even as he is teaching, he is learning. So this last thought is that we must understand as teachers, parents, educators in general, we are all educators, but we must understand we are also learners. So the ability to learn even from the babble of a child, to learn from the blossoming of a flower, it's such a aha feeling. Sometimes I get such a aha when a child says something, I said, oh wow, this is so wonderful. Or someone. So when then can it come? When we are always filled with the wonder of a child. We lose this childhood as we grow up. We are adults. So the wonder is lost. Adults are known. They are mature people. They know about everything. So keep a little child inside us who is full of wonder, who knows nothing but wants to know everything. Keep the youthful energies inside. A youth who is striving for the impossible. For the young person, nothing should be impossible. And the old who is carrying his wisdom but looking for ways and means by which he can bring his wisdom back to life and give it back to earth. So all these three are not three different stages of life. They must be there in each one of us simultaneously. Even as we grow into what is called as old age, not a good term, but okay, as we grow past 60, we must know that, well, now is the time when I can start learning. This is the child. I have done my quota of mistakes. Now, I can learn. 80, well, I have learned a little bit. There is a lot more to learn. Learn from grandchildren. This idea that I have learned, I have to give knowledge. Now, I'm a wise old man. It should go away. And when I am 80, one of the remarkable things about the mother, which I feel, many remarkable things, but look at at 91, she has started a universal township with an ideal which is unimaginable. Orville, 1968, when the mother is celebrating her 90th birthday, that time Auroville is launched. Who at 90 would like to enter into a project? Because for her, it's not just a project involving some people whom she will direct and guide. She has to pour her energies into them, govern them inwardly, outwardly, money, everything. And she undertakes a project. Why? Because it's good for humanity. That's all. She is implanting a seed upon earth. So let's keep that wonder of a child and the youthful energies moving toward the future. And of course, the sage-like wisdom which we gather through real life experiences. And finally, let's get out of this too much of boy-girl thing, which these children are coming out. I should have mentioned it before, but since, Sunday I remembered, it's important to understand this is happening spontaneously. So children nowadays live in that the only relationship that they value is basically friendship. And of course, they are learning to love. All other frames are getting broken. So love is, of course, the highest energy, finally, with which we can stop. They must learn to love. Love has been crushed in all this rational education, all left side analysis, quick computer systems, but they have lost on love. And I think if we can awaken a seed of true love within them, the need for true love, and true love which is about giving oneself, then we would have done much more than we could, probably expected of us. Because ultimately, whatever we may say, Savitri, 3 lines, man is a dynamo for God's work. Nature does most for him, God the high rest. Only his soul's consent is his own. So the role of parents, educators is to teach him how to consult his own soul and find the counsel from there. Rest will follow, rest will be managed. So let me close with few lines from, Sri Aurobindo Savitri for the new age children. He has foreseen, and they are marvelous lines, what these children would be who are going to come in the future. So one of my favorite lines, and with that we can close. Okay. This from Sri Aurobindo Savitri. Some of us who may not know, it's the longest epic in English language, nearly 24,000 lines. And as 12 books, this is book 3, canto 4. A giant dance of Shiva toward the past, which we know now. There was a thunder as of worlds that fall. Earth was overrun with fire and the roar of death, which we spoke about in the first half of the previous century. But what he sees through that night, something else is coming. And that is wonderful. I saw the omnipotent's flaming pioneers over the heavenly verge, which turns towards life, come crowding down the amber stairs of birth. Forerunners of a divine multitude, out of the paths of the morning star they came, into the little room of mortal life. I saw them cross the twilight of an age. We are seeing an age of transition. That's what he's referring to. The old world is dying and the new world is born. Not will be born, but is born. These sun-eyed children of a marvelous dawn, the great creators with wide brows of calm, the massive barrier breakers of the world, and wrestlers with destiny in her lists of will, the laborers in the quarries of the gods, the messengers of the incommunicable, the architects of immortality. Into the fallen human sphere they came, faces that wore the immortal's glory still, voices that communed still with the thoughts of God, bodies made beautiful by the Spirit's light, carrying the magic word, the mystic fire, carrying the Dionysian cup of joy, approaching eyes of a diviner man, lips chanting an unknown anthem of the soul, feet echoing in the corridors of time, high priests of wisdom, sweetness, might, and bliss, opposites coming together, discoverers of beauty's sunlit ways, and swimmers of love's laughing fiery floods, and dancers within rapture's golden doors. Their tread one day shall change the suffering earth and justify the light on nature's face. So we are witnessing the birth of a new world, new species, or subspecies if you like it. Earth is going through a massive shift, a new creation which is shaping now in the human body as a catalyst, just as man was born in a body which was half ape and half human, but progress to that. So we also have now a superhumanity of tomorrow being born within the human frame, but it will end up creating a new humanity, new beings, and it will fulfill the purpose for which creation has been made, a divine life in a divine body. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Saab. Thank you, Alok ji. Thank you very, very much for your authentic and experienced and deep within from the heart talk. We really liked it. Now we shall move on to question and answer session, depending on how much time we have. Dr. Saab, how much time do you have?
We have about half an hour. It's fine. I mean,
Okay.
or
So-
15, 20 minutes depends on the questions. Yes.
Okay. So we'll first go to the questions that are here as comments.
Yes.
So some Rahul Bisumke, a participant from Nepal, he has asked, how do you define consciousness?
Okay. So how to define consciousness? It's a whole workshop, but let me start from where we are, and I'm glad about the question. So what is consciousness? We normally use it in the common parlance by defining it as the ability or the power with which we become aware. So that's how we say that I'm conscious of something. So we as human beings have a certain kind of consciousness or a power with which we become aware. And when we become aware, there is also associated with consciousness the will to execute. The two go together. If we are not aware, we don't execute. So we can only execute by the consciousness with which we become aware. So consciousness is a dual functioning or capacity, which means the power to become aware, knowledge, and the power to execute, will. So consciousness implies both. But now, as human beings, we are aware of consciousness in a certain kind of modality of functioning. And we have a belief which, because we live within this frame, we think that mental consciousness, which we embody, is the only mode of functioning of consciousness. But if we look at animals, they also have a certain kind of knowledge, which is instinctive knowledge, and a certain kind of will and action, which is instinctive action. So one thing we discovered that, well, we are not the only guys who are conscious. There are animals. If we go below to plants, we'll see that plants are also conscious in their own way. They know, that they have to move towards the light. Instinctively, they know. And some of the plants, the way they act and function, it's amazing, as if they are completely aware of the dangers, what they should do and not do. They have all the knowledge. This is what is meant by Veda, that, it's the knowledge inbuilt within each atom of creation. And then we go further down, we discover even atoms. They don't have consciousness the way we have, but they also know what should be there in their outer orbit. And, that's what we call as laws that govern the atomic movement and structure. So consciousness is a fundamental power which is inherent in creation. And even if you destroy the form, consciousness, like energy, is indestructible. It can change. It can shift from one to another. Now, shifting example is that, well, in the morning, we all wake up and we are in one state of consciousness. But in the afternoon, we may be completely different state of consciousness. And we identify with it. And let's say in the morning, we are full of joy and somebody meets us and says, oh, you look so happy. Yes, I am so happy. Afternoon, we are a little grumpy and tired. You are so tired. Yes, I am so tired. In the evening, somebody is very angry. Oh, you are so angry. Yes, I am angry. Now look at it. The I is identifying with anger, with joy, with tiredness, and so on. So basically, there is one consciousness, but on many planes, many domains, many dimensions. This we discover even as human beings. Now, is human formula the last? This is where we discovered that in mystic and yogic lore, they went climbing through the ladder of consciousness. What is the highest that human beings are capable of? The highest state of inner peace, inner harmony, inner bliss. And they discovered that beyond man, there are ranges of consciousness which we can access. It's not easy because human formula is like a magic circle nature has drawn around us. And how it guards the circle is very amazing. Simply by instilling doubt that it's not possible to go beyond. You know, it's almost like the animal who is in a circus, a lion. Have you ever wondered that there are 9 lions and the ringmaster is with a little chabuk, he is managing them, and they're being managed because they've been taught, trained. Nature has put them in that state that man is superior. What if suddenly lions woke up to this reality that we are lion and all these guys, they are scared of us? But they don't, because this is something instinctive inside them. So human beings have this feeling, impression that we are the end, the ultimate. This idea that we are on top of the so-called food chain, the idea of food chain itself is a very erroneous one, but not going into that. But this idea that we are the top, which visibly we are, and therefore we stop growing. We don't realize that there is something much more beyond. So there are ranges of consciousness beyond the human mind, which can turn his mind into a sage, seer, and as Sri Aurobindo says, reach a point where one can break free entirely from the mental domain, bring in a new force and a new consciousness, and even transmute the human body. So form and consciousness have this dual play. The form conditions the consciousness, limits it as it were. You pick up ocean water and put it in a small vessel, it's conditioned by the vessel. But if you break the vessel, it's the same water. The water in the Ganges and the water in the bottle, the Ganges, they're the same water. If you spill over the bottle, the water is going to be the same. But we have to learn now that water in the bottle, now its origin is there in the Ganges. Not only the Ganges, there is the Gangotri, Gomukh, from where it is coming. And beyond Gomukh, there is the Shiva's, Jata. And beyond the Shiva's Jata, it is in the heart of Vishnu. It is in that feeling where Ganges originates. So when we trace upstream any state of consciousness, if we go upstream, refine it, purify it, take it to its utmost, we'll reach the origin. And that origin is called divine. So there is the divine consciousness, which is the origin of consciousness, where the mystic would say it's perfect consciousness, perfect bliss, perfect love, perfect harmony, perfect knowledge, wisdom, perfect strength, and all woven together in a beautiful concord, not as disorderly and disharmonious here. But there is no perfect form to embody it. But through a process of evolution, as we've seen the story of the Dashavatar, nature is trying to build a form which can embody the perfect consciousness. And that time of transition has come now, because in human being now the aspiration for a perfect consciousness is already there, which means this we are bound to embody higher and higher states of consciousness, which will press upon our body and brain till one day, because of this constant pressure, a new seeking, a new body and a new brain will emerge out of the old. So this is in a very small nutshell about consciousness. It's a whole, it's a whole workshop, but this is just in short.
Thank you.
It is the fundamental principle in the universe, the fundamental power, consciousness. All is woven by consciousness. Yes. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Saab. Rahulji, we'll move from your question to the next question. Thank you, Anu Shah Jainji, for your question. She is asking, Dr. Saab, sir, what will be a broad framework of learning that you shall lay down for this new generation?
Okay. Thank you so much. What will be the broad framework of learning for the new generation? As I said, that, I have some radical ideas. Let classrooms turn into, let classrooms walls open up and become one with entire nature, not just, plant nature, animal nature, human nature. their own nature. So students should become students of themselves. There is a very beautiful word used in the Gita and Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Swadhyaya. So right now they are learning about everything except themselves. So they should be given a lot of time to study themselves, places where they can retreat in silence, when we can have interaction with them about themselves, who they are, what they are, with no concept, fixed ideas in the mind, but slowly leading them toward their own self-discovery. Children should understand it's not that they have to discover by the time they pass out of their school, but they should understand that there is a scope of endless self-discovery, and this discovery takes place through the contact with the world, at the same time by going within. So merely information about how a thing operates is not enough. The why of things and how that learning translates, that understanding of the framework of nature translates into their own inner growth. As I said, river, sun, everything teaches us, flower teaches us. So this can be done only by, not all teachers may be ready, but within our framework, there should be always those who are like guides, who are not traditionally teachers, but they are available for students. It may not be for every student, though it will be nice to have these interaction of these guides with maybe once a week in the classroom. But at least there are students in whom the urge of learning has become very conscious, and they can go to these guides and ask them those questions which they can't ask in the classroom because the framework doesn't provide it. How do they ask in a typical classroom that what determines the number of electrons which will be there in the outer orbit of the atom? What determines that a leaf will reflect only green light and absorb the others? There are questions which come when the answers have been given. Those questions, I use the word Sesh Prashna, the question beyond questions. There should be somebody to whom they can ask. And that's what I would, I believe incorporating. And of course, emphasis on physical education, because body is the basis of everything, which is sadly missing because of overemphasis on result. And very importantly, that children are unique. To put them into slots of 99%, 99.5% is a very old paradigm. Each child is unique. You see this Aesop's fable that, if a rat and tortoise run a race, by strange freak accident, tortoise wins because the rat, the rabbit tries to, relax. It's an impossible thing. See, this is not organically true. But rather it should be, well, on the ground, the rabbit runs and wins. On the sea, the tortoise runs and wins. Because to each his own world, to each his own capacity. Each child is unique. But that cannot happen, I suppose, if, education is sold with, 40 children per classroom. It can't work out like that. So there should be more teachers and, there should be more open-ended learning, not closed into lot of answers. It should be questions. Based on the questions and you're seeking, you learn. If you don't have questions, you have interest in something else, you go in that direction. That's what free progress is meant to inculcate. One may be interested in photography. Fine, that's your field. Go there. Discover your own aptitude and temperament. And now the world is becoming like that, where this is possible. Earlier, when it was too much into job bracket, it wasn't possible. But those who want to learn, yes, they have people whom they can go and ask things on their own and learn. So it's a big change and shift. So basically, if in one word we have to use the word, I would say universal learning. They should understand that learning is not something which comes from teachers and classroom. Learning is from within us. And it is our contact with an environment. When we are not developed inside with not many questions, and our consciousness is not developed, we learn very little. But when we have grown up far beyond, our learning also, the same experience is received very differently by consciousness which is far advanced. So this is what they must understand, that this stress on self-learning, self-education, growth in terms of consciousness through practical examples, self-observation, how they can shift consciousness from one state to another. Plenty of examples, which due to paucity of time, I'm not touching upon, which can be taken up, but the stress should be on that. And finally, most important, on discovering something which is beyond the human frame of nature, which is the psychic being. So we identify ourselves with, as I said, with all our outer things, in the environment in which we are born. But there is something which is beyond the environment. When we speak about rebirth in India, what does it mean? We have assumed many bodies, many personalities. So there is something which assumes these bodies and personalities, which is not bound or tied with them. Well, this is my pedestal, but not my last reality. And also beyond the human mind, there are things beyond reckoning. To open them towards those higher and greater and wider, vaster realities is the task of an educator. And all these things, psychic and spiritual education, education of mind, our refinement of our vital, which is sadly missing, from very crude towards through a sense of beauty, through a sense of the real joy of life. They've forgotten how to be happy, to bring out the love which is inside. The heart is completely stifled, and to make the base of the body stronger. All these things are part of the vast landscape of education. All right.
Thank you. Thank you. We have number of questions, so we may not be able to address all the questions, but we'll try to move quite fast. The next question is about concentration. Bhim, can you go? Bhim Saudji from Kathmandu, he is asking, concentration is necessary for consciousness, but people have problem to be concentrated. Could you say some techniques of concentration?
Yes. So concentration actually is natural to person, every human being. But the problem is that we may give them a subject in which they are not interested in. So start with whatever they are interested in. A child is interested in play, teach him how to be concentrated in play. Very conscious and concentrated. He's playing football, fine. He must become good footballer. He shouldn't miss a single ball. Such should be his concentration. So now, there are several games, of course, exercises, Mikado and all these things. But the natural way to do it is that whatever they are engaged in work, everybody does some work. To fold a sheet, do it with all awareness. Climbing stairs. So everything in life can become a way to concentrate. Again, this idea of cutting off from real life, teaching them, sit now, close your eyes and concentrate. Well, a time comes when they would feel the need to go within and concentrate. But first they must learn the capacity to gather all the threads of life which are scattered. You can't play football very well if your mind is wandering into, my friend and somebody else in the stands and things like. You can't, even on result, if there is focus on will we win or lose, you can't play it well. But one plays well when one is fully focused, one becomes the play and takes the joy of the play. So concentration, especially for children who are very restless, comes very easily through games, because restless means the vital. Now teach them a lot of physical education and workout by which they can learn. Then also in work, they should learn to concentrate on the work at hand. Then a time will come, or read something. Let them read maybe a paragraph with full attention. Then when they are ready with all this, the faculty is developed. Then they can apply it in any field, including going within. We do the other way around. We start teaching children, who are 8-year, 9-year-old, close your eyes and concentrate. What do? The mind wanders. Their feet are restless. Their hands are twitching. So, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, they are waiting. Or sometimes they are happy. Somebody told me that, our children can concentrate for half an hour. I said, sure, they are either sleeping or, they are happy that at least we won't have a proper class today. So now this, first teach them what is concentration through natural, organic things in life. Education should be connected with life. Now, when children reach a point, some will reach a point where they want to concentrate and go within. Then it's about, picking up an object inside, or a state of consciousness, on peace, on idea, or an image like fire, or a deity, the Divine Mother, or, whatever deity, Christ, Krishna, whatever way one conceives, or on a word, a string of mantras. That is a specialized activity of concentration. It's not synonymous with concentration. Concentration literally means the ability to gather these strings of consciousness and focus on one point. There was a movie called Utsav. So it's a very interesting movie. It's a movie about, it's a regular movie, but a little good. But it starts with a very interesting scene. In the scene, they show in ancient times, medieval times, and two thieves are, they have entered a house, broken into the house by breaking the wall. And when they are coming out, so now they have all the wealth and they want to run away. So now the junior thief wants to run. The master says, no, master, well, I hope I'm not teaching how to steal well. but I am just about, it hit very hard, it's a very beautiful film on this. So the master said, no, I can't go. I must make this little gap that I have made in the wall perfect. He said, why do you want to do this? He said, it's about my name. What will people think? What kind of a foolish thief he was. So even as a thief, he wants to, excel. I mean, in ashram context, I remember somebody came and had lost a key, and he went to a key making department, gave the suitcase, and he made a key. And he said, the person who had lost the key said, okay, good, thank you. He said, no, wait, I'm going to make a duplicate. So he said, no, I don't need a duplicate. And the key maker said, what if you lose this one? So I have to make it, because this is my job to make things very beautiful and perfect. In one of the aphorism, Sri Aurobindo says very beautifully, it is better to be a good shoemaker than an incompetent king. So this joy of doing their work, to strive towards perfection in anything, itself leads to the development of a faculty of concentration. That's why when we are little children, our teachers teach us how to write cursive well. Calligraphy is one of the best ways to practice concentration. And as a child, this is what was taught. The idea, it was not a punishment. It's like we learn to focus our energies on simply making a letter beautifully. But it is taught the wrong way. Here, you have made a mistake and do it 10 times. It should not be like a mistake. It should be more positively reinforced with the joy of learning. So this, just as I said, very brief prelude. All of these are, very good subjects for a whole discussion. Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Calligraphy is a way of developing concentration. So that's one of the idea behind how we can improve our concentration. That's what Dr. Saab says. We have a comment from Derry Hanum. He is also a keynote speaker at IDEC and an author. He says that my first IDEC in Asia. Thanks for the beautiful talk, which has taken me beyond an Eurocentric assumptions and reopened the question, where does love come from? In my mind now for 20 minutes, quite to let the answer float into my consciousness. So Derry is trying to figure out where does love come from. So maybe you would like to say a few words about it?
Well, yes, it was really a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. And what is quite exciting for me is to hear from another culture some of the things we're trying to work towards in Europe and North America and Australia. And we talk about self-directed education and children needing time and to work in teams and time and space to develop their learning in the context of democratic processes and respect for human rights. And I was thinking of maybe we should change the idea of self-directed learning or self-directed education. We should widen it to become self-exploring learning and self-exploring education. And so for me, listening to your talk has been a wonderful introduction to the conference, bringing what you might call Asian thinking and European thinking into harmony. So thank you so much for that. And I will be mentioning some of the ideas from your talk in my talk next Friday.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I'm grateful for these wonderful words of wisdom. And thank you for them. Yes. So maybe one last question we can take. Yes.
Okay. So do we have some questions, maybe in person?
Or
can I ask?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, sir. Just I am also a school teacher. So your talk is so nice regarding the rich children, poor children. My query is, so what the Indian education system now? We are working at the getting grades, result. We are struggling with that. So what you can say about these things?
Okay, yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned it. See, as I said, a new world is born, but the old world is dying. I was, careful about choosing my words. So I didn't say the old world is dead. it's, or maybe it's gasping. So you know what happens I have encounters with death. So when people are, during the time of death, there are two kinds of death. One is a swift departure. The other is when they are gasping for a long time. Now this gasping is you're holding on to the old life. So what we are seeing, this extreme stress upon, marks and grades, is the spasm of the last dying world. Don't worry about it. This is not going to go further beyond a point. The children are changing. They will change it. So our stress should be in our education, regardless of what people or, the old world expects of us. Those of us who are born with a new impulsion, we should bring in this new creative impulsion in life. And that's what is given to us. See, beyond this systems, when they will change, it's a very huge task. And maybe there are people who belong to the old world and believe in it. There are plenty still. But there are new kind of children who are coming up, and our focus should be on them. So I'll give you an example. I used to teach I still teach in this way, but there used to be teaching proper, psychology and psychiatry with MD students and others. And, there is a typical framework of Freudian psychology and all these things. And I was supposed to be expected to, teach those things. So I said, look here, you give me any framework and I'll go beyond it, because, you can't limit a teacher to the framework in which he's given. And so I would invariably do that, which led to a aha feeling in children. And this is how we can use every experience, including the grades. Ask them that, do you think this is your reality? Do you think this represents who you are? And this itself can become a means of learning. Rest, of course, school systems, governments, they are the last to change. Let me tell you very frankly, whatever, regardless of whichever place, let's not put our hope there. Our hope is in the children who embody a new aspiration for tomorrow. And even if there are few of them, 5 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 100, teacher's job is of a new consciousness to largely focus on that. And those who want to belong to the old world, fine. There's the whole sort of other things are there. So stay focused on the new things which are, striving to take birth. Okay, so I think we can probably, stop here.
Hello, Bhayaji. We have one more, maybe if you have just a minute, we have last question here.
Sure, please.
Yeah, we have a question from Geeta Lakshmi Ganjam. She's asking you how to change mindset of parents.
Okay. Thank you for this question. How to change mindset of parents? I would only say don't try it. But since you are insisting, see, one of the ways I've tried in a school which was brought, along the lines of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. So what we used to do is, there were 2-3 things, practical things which we used to do. One was short little, pamphlets which relate to child, like things they have never thought about their child. And one little passage, don't give them books, they will never read it. But maybe one pamphlet once a month, small packages, and just pass it on to them. And maybe one day one of them will pick up. This is one way. Second is a dual assessment, that children are, assessed by teachers, but parents should assess, but in a very different way. So we had made a report card of, is your child generous? Is your child courageous? Does he have gratitude? So it made the parents wonder, oh, this is a new way of, we never looked at this side of my child. So this is the second way. Third is, which is very radical, and I don't know, how much one can implement, but I used to ask children to grade understand their teachers, what is not grade them, because that will bring in the sense, unnecessary competition and jealousy, but which are the teachers you feel is best and why? And what are the things you would want to change in your parents and why? Now, this becomes a child-centric education. So, and this was shared with the parent that, look, maybe, a child would write, my parents fight with each other. Now, parents begin to wonder that, oh, there are things I need to change. My child feels it and I have never looked at it. So a child-centric education more and more. And finally, just as we have these conferences for teachers, They should be also for parents. So, once in a while, we have parent-teacher meeting, but it is completely centered around marks and performance and the behavior of the child. There should be parent-teacher meeting wherein parents, it's a beautiful occasion to come together and understand what a child is about. Many of them are full of fear and carrying conventional ideas that, if my child doesn't get so many marks, he's doomed. This must go. And it's the task of the educators. Instead, we start playing into their hands. Oh, yes, your child doesn't study, doesn't do well. Now we have a role to play in talking to the parents and making them understand and conscious. That's what a teacher is about. That look, it's not just about a child bringing so many marks or earning so much outer wealth, but also a child who is able to lead a life which is inwardly stable. He is able to experience the spontaneous joy of living. He is able to, most importantly, unleash the energies of love, which is ultimately going to help him. Emotional education, which is missing. I mean, it's a whole subject. Spiritual education, spiritual quotient, which is completely missing. So there are dimensions of growth, which if they are not there in human beings, then they are going to remain half humanity and half animality. You see, after all, let me close with this idea. See, what was the ancient thought you will see about Devas and Asuras, Indian thought. So who was an Asura? Asura was a brilliant intellectual, but with a cold heart. Now imagine, do we want our children to become that? He was devouring, he was full of greed, crude passions, cold heart, but brilliant intellectual. Whereas on the other hand, the Deva type also were intelligent, but also the love in the heart should blossom. The passions must be most refined. So we should explain to the parents through these interactions and meetings so that they become a little more educated. Though I must say it is a very nutty task because parents are formed creatures. With children, it's easier because they are plastic, malleable. They have a spontaneous trust in teachers. But parents are a little crusted over, but still, effort should be made. All right?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
I have been following some of your instructions, but still I need to do a lot. And I will definitely take your suggestions and make parents understand better their own children. Thank you
so much. And most welcome to write in case there are any more questions. Please feel free to write.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Ramchandra Das, Dr. Swamiji has some question from Ashram here.
Yes.
Another question. So we are planning that we want to put your session once more, maybe within these 15 days. So we work on that. So please, you try to find out a day.
Yes.
Send
Yes.
So that will be nice. So that people have more chance to ask many other questions regarding democratic education, free education.
Yes.
Education related with the spirituality, etc.
Okay, we can do like that. We can have a Q&A session where we can have some questions in advance. So it'll be much easier to focus on a wider range of subjects. Yes?
That would be
surely we can have that. And we'll be in touch over email today or tomorrow, and we can decide a date and time. Yes? Okay. Thank you so much.
I'm sure we have a lot of questions in our mind at the moment, but we don't have time to address all of these questions. So I would like all the participants to actually, you can contact Dr. Saab through his email address. It can be found on our website as well. Or Dr. Saab, is it possible for you to write it down like there? Or I can send them,
Yeah, you can please send them. I mean, it can be circulated. There's no problem. Yeah, because in email, writing down the problem is one letter is missing or a dot. It goes somewhere else. Please feel free to write. Absolutely. No problem. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes.
We end this welcome session. For now, we have another session coming up. The title of the talk is Sir Ken Robinson Through the Eyes of Kate Robinson in 2 hours. And in 4 hours, we have another talk on Mother Nature's Pedagogy, the Biology of Self-Directed Education by Peter Gray. So we shall thank Dr. Saab and we'll leave the conference at the moment here. Thank you all. Thank you very much. And after this, we have yoga and meditation session by Swami Ramchandra. Yes. Was there anyone saying something? Okay, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you for the talk.
Thank you.